Yep.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. Please welcome to the stage Sue Mangold and Dr. Tammy Benton.
Good evening, and thank you so much for being here. It's so great to be with all of you. There's so much energy and we feel so much support, and I say this every year, but it's true, nobody loves these kinds of things more than me, so thank you so much for being here. I think all of you know that Juvenile Law Center is committed to fighting for rights, dignity, equity, and opportunity for youth in the child welfare and justice systems. We believe deeply about our work, and our passion fuels our commitment. Your support and your presence here tonight also powers us to fight. I want to thank our amazing staff. It's so great to see former staff members with us here too tonight, and I want to give a special shout out to our youth advocates and alumni who have joined us this evening. I really want to take a moment because every year we are thrilled to welcome more and more people who are returning to our community after being sentenced as children to die in prison. We can't express how happy we are to have you with us tonight, and we look forward to more and more members of the community joining us next year. I want to thank our wonderful board members, past and present, who are with us tonight, and I especially want to recognize our former board chair, Ann Rosewater, who's with us tonight, because she will be working with us to lead our 50th anniversary celebration next year. So if you think tonight is great, we are here to celebrate the work of Juvenile Law Center and the amazing work of our recipients. Angel Rodriguez, Elizabeth Scott and Larry Steinberg, and Bryan Stevenson. Their work really encompasses the breadth of the work of Juvenile Law Center now and over the past 49 years. You'll hear more about their work throughout the evening, but congratulations to you all, and we are proud to honor your work. A little public announcement, there is a QR code. As all of you know, I am never shy to ask for support. There's a little QR code if you're moved to donate tonight, and you can also order a t-shirt that pushes forward our message to abolish youth prisons. And those are, you'll see those on the way out. It's now my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Tammy Benton, who's the chair of our board of directors. Tammy's the psychiatrist in chief and chair of the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She's the president of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Tammy's a long-time collaborator with our work, and we are thrilled to have her chairing our board. Tammy?
Thank you, Susan. And since you've stolen all my words, I will have very little to say. But I do want to welcome you all to this event, our biggest celebration of the year. During this celebration for the Juvenile Law Prize, we honor individuals who have made significant contributions to the advancement of our work with child welfare and juvenile justice. It is our greatest celebration of the year. It is wonderful to see so many of you. Thank you for your continuing support. Thank you to the board. Thank you to Sue for being such a great partner. And I'm looking forward to having an opportunity to speak with you this evening. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Jessica Fireman and Ria Saha Shah.
Hello, hello. In Juvenile Law Center's last strategic planning process, we set forth a vision to address the deep harm and structural disparities of the child welfare and the justice systems. As we fight to limit the reach of these systems, ultimately abolishing them, and direct resources instead to youth, families, and communities, we also work to limit the harm that young people face when they're caught up in these systems. Our approach is interconnected. We use legal and policy advocacy, youth-led advocacy, and strategic communications. Jessica and I would like to take a moment to share a little bit about this work.
When our friend and youth advocate Shai Hill, who's here somewhere, there we go. When Shai was 16, she was arrested in school after defending her little brother from a bully. 3 years later, she couldn't come up with $420 in fees that the court was asking for, so the court kept her on juvenile probation for an entire additional year. Since then, Shai and members of our debt-free justice team and our partners, including youth leaders across the country, have advocated to end these harmful fees and fines. We've seen great results. 23 states and 7 local jurisdictions have enacted reforms eliminating fees and fines. It is heartwarming. 10 more states have legislation pending, even as we speak. The United States Department of Justice has issued guidance advising folks across the country that young people should be presumed unable to pay fees and fines for obvious reasons. And these policies have relieved youth and families of $700 million of debt. And we are forging new ground, fighting fees and fines in the child welfare system or the family policing system, in municipal courts, and for young people in the adult system. Side by side with youth and families, we'll keep fighting to ensure that poverty doesn't push young people into the system and that the system doesn't push young people into poverty. I want to shift gears now to talk a little bit about our work to fight abuse in institutions. This is difficult content, so a heads up that I will be sharing some of the experiences and the details of what young people we work with have faced. With our co-counsel Education Law Center in Deckert, I'm sure some of you are here tonight, thank you for joining us. We brought a lawsuit on behalf of hundreds of children at Glen Mills School who faced abusive conditions while locked up. As our lawsuit alleges, and as the Philadelphia Inquirer reported, counselors physically assaulted youth, they encouraged young people to beat each other up, they deprived them of education, and they intimidated children and their families into silence. The case is underway, so stay tuned for results as the work continues. We saw similar problems in Wisconsin, where staff locked residents in solitary confinement, chained them to tables for the 1 hour they let them out of their cells a day, strip searched them repeatedly, and pepper sprayed them even when they were already locked in their cells. After settling the case and working intensively with a monitor, we've seen crucial improvements. At our most recent visit, we saw staff do not use pepper spray, children are never shackled to tables, staff almost never strip search youth, and solitary confinement is rarely used, although we are still working to eliminate it. We are incredibly grateful for the partnership and leadership of community organizers in Wisconsin who have been pushing for young people to come back home. In collaboration with them, we've also seen great progress. When we started the case, there were 200 children locked up there. Now there are only 64. The state passed legislation to close the facilities. We clap now, but we have to keep working. The work is far from over. The legislation is passed, and now we need it to be enacted. Now we need it to be implemented, but we have come a long way. We will keep fighting in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, and across the country to protect young people from abusive facilities. But more importantly, we'll always work with young people and families to bring them home and to their families and communities. And I'll turn it back to Rhea.
In the last year, we've also explored new ground to keep young people out of the system in the first place. fighting back against policies that criminalize young people for skipping school, for the clothes that they wear, or even for sleeping outside when they are forced out of their homes or not safe in their homes. In addition, for years with the support and partnership of some of our honorees today, we've been working to shape youth sentencing law and keep youth out of adult court. After success in the United States Supreme Court ruling mandatory life without parole sentences for youth unconstitutional, we supported attorneys across the country seeking resentencing hearings for their clients. And in our home state of Pennsylvania, we dove into the over 500 cases of individuals who were serving juvenile life without parole sentences. We continue to provide support to attorneys and represent individuals. Today, I'm happy to say that more than 90% of Pennsylvanians who previously feared they would die in prison have been resentenced, and over 50% are home. Many are here today in this room with us. We are so honored to continue to work alongside them in our efforts to transform youth sentencing. So this was just a sample of the breadth of work the hardworking team at Juvenile Law Center does. So if I can just take one moment for the staff and the youth advocates of Juvenile Law Center to stand so you can join me in recognizing them. As you can see, we are small but mighty. Our national advocacy work is supported by our board of directors, by our pro bono partners, individual donors and funders, and all of you in this room. It's also bolstered by our partnerships with researchers, advocates, and communities. And our Leadership Prize winners today exemplify the best of these partners. Congratulations to you all. We're so grateful for the ways that your work has inspired and enhanced our advocacy.
The Juvenile Law Center's Leadership Prize is awarded to outstanding advocates working to advance the rights and well-being of youth in the child welfare and juvenile justice systems.
Just as these efforts to advance the field will continue, though, the innovations should continue to be recognized and noted and celebrated. As a result, it gives me great pleasure to be able to announce tonight the establishment of the Juvenile Law Center Leadership Prize.
Every prize needs an inaugural winner. And so the inaugural winner of the Juvenile Law Center Leadership Prize for 2015 is Bob Schwartz.
Many of us in our profession are asked, what do we do? And we say, well, we're lawyers for children. But that's not really the story. We're building a better world for them. You and me, the folks at Juvenile Law Center, all of our colleagues, our partners, our funders, that's what we're building together.
All of you are part of this movement. We all care about children, we all care about young people, and that we know that we could do so much harm, and we have done so much harm by incarcerating our young people.
I'm happy to say that we've been able to make significant changes in international standards on child soldiers, on child domestic workers, and on children working with mercury in gold mines.
And I look forward to continuing to work with all of you to ensure every child the prize of a loving, safe, permanent family.
We're all getting started. I stand on the shoulders of giants, and there are many, but I also know many people like me that are young and up and coming that are going to do much greater things, and I'm proud, and I'm humbled, and I'm honored, and I'm grateful.
I believe that Americans should be informed that our vision of justice is skewed, manipulated by racism, classism, and stubbornness that keeps outdated policy in place.
Juvenile Law Center, thank you so much for everything that you stand for. I appreciate you.
I also want to thank my family, Stoneleaf Foundation, who helped me when I did finish the Human Rights Watch report, which was amazing, based on 500 interviews of children that were raised on registries.
Our strongest messengers are people who are formerly incarcerated men and women and victims of violent crime.
We all have the obligation to stop, to listen, and to elevate and lift up our young people, and to celebrate their hope and their vision, and to let them lead us to a better world for every single young person who's in foster care. We can get there.
There is an unprecedented opportunity to change our country's approach to child welfare, to create one that is far more prevention-oriented, racially just, and centered on the needs of children and families.
You don't just use forensic psychiatrists or psychologists. You have to consult with the world of the psychiatrists and psychologists who know how these things affect kids.
I learned many critical lessons in my first case. Children and families suffer great harm in systems that value convenience over compassion. One person paying attention can disrupt giant bureaucracies.
Over several months, we visited inmates in Kansas, Missouri, and Texas, including one man on death row, all who grew up in foster care. All of them described the trauma of being removed from their homes. Michelle Voorhees, an inmate in Kansas, told us, every single move is a traumatic experience, and the more you get moved around, the more trauma you endure.
Moments like this really give us an opportunity to think about why we advocate for children. And I can't help but think of all of the Black and brown children who have been impacted by policing in America.
Right now is a time where I believe we can transform child welfare between the technology push, the new funding, the centering of lived experience in a way that it has never been centered before.
I am taking this as a recognition of the importance of scientific research that's done by myself and by many colleagues to further the work that you folks do. I often tell my students, if you're going to do good psychology and law research, you need to have a lawyer advising or mentoring you in order to make sure that if you get worthwhile results, they're going to be legally relevant and applicable.
Since I've been released, I have been paying it forward, being a voice for other young people still in the system. Other young people whose voices are not heard, whose faces are not known. It's something that God has given me a heart for. And I mean, it's not really work to me, to be honest. It feels more of a purpose. So I appreciate being honored for that being recognized with this award. And I just want to say that it gives me so much motivation to keep going even harder, to keep fighting even harder. And I'm going to do just that.
I hope that this leadership prize will help to spotlight the growing abolitionist movement to replace the logic of surveilling and separating families in the name of protecting children with an approach that truly cares for their welfare. Thank you, Juvenile Law Center, from the bottom of my heart.
When we think about building a better world, education is so foundational to all of us. And all of us at some point wouldn't be here tonight if there wasn't somebody somewhere at some time during our educational careers who didn't make a difference in our lives. They may not remember us, but we sure remember who they are.
I believe that we build a just society by stitching these local experiments and freedom dreaming together and learning from each other. This is how, bit by bit, we create the communities that we need. We're not talking about ending policing and prisons and the family regulation system overnight. It's about building up the care infrastructure that will make those things obsolete.
There's no one better positioned to inform this work than those who have been directly impacted, whether by the child welfare system, the juvenile justice system, or the criminal justice system. And so we want to thank you all for giving us this opportunity to both be seen as human beings, to be recognized as worthy of love, to be treated with humanity, and now in this most beautiful moment is in the movement for fair sentencing and age-appropriate and trauma-informed treatment of kids, to be leaders. Imagine that, you all. To think that once upon a time, We were once thrown away by society, and yet we've been uncovered as leaders. So I want to thank all of you for believing in us and for trusting in our leadership.
Please welcome to the stage Kalia Ali and Jason Flom.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. I'm humbled to be in the presence of so many of my heroes and to be here with my life partner, who happens to be the daughter of my greatest hero, Muhammad Ali. Not because of his boxing, legendary boxing skills, but because of his leadership in civil rights. And so I'm never nervous speaking, but now I am. And I have to say, I've been doing this type of work for 31 years now. So many different aspects of our criminal legal system that I just want to end mass incarceration in my lifetime. And so anything that touches that is in my wheelhouse. And I view it as a moral imperative because for me, growing up, I was a total fuck up. I was doing drugs and stealing stuff and doing all kinds of things that would have landed me up being maybe one of the first clients of the Juvenile Law Center, except I don't even think you guys were operating in New York City at that time. But I recognize it but for the color of my skin and the neighborhood I grew up in, the zip code I was lucky enough to be raised in, I would have ended up in prison. But instead I ended up in rehab and ended up building successful businesses and going on to have a very nice life. So standing up for the people who aren't as fortunate, who did nothing different than what I did, and in many cases less than I did, is, like I said, a moral imperative. Kalia and I met a year and a half ago. I think our second date was at a maximum security prison where we went to visit an innocent man. I know that was a risk, but it turned out pretty well. And I think from there, it's been an incredible journey. She is as fine of a human being as anyone could ever hope to be with. And I have to say, Angel, who we're here to introduce, is a true leader and hero in every sense of the word. As I said, I've been doing this for 31 years, so that's about half as long as you, Angel, I guess. I don't want to embarrass him, but yes, I do. But the work of Avenues for Justice is so extraordinary. You know, as a lifelong New Yorker, I'm well aware of the horrors of Rikers Island and the damage that we as a city inflict on our most vulnerable citizens, especially the youth. What Angel has done is he has shown that he can take, with his organization, these children at the time of their first serious interaction with the criminal legal system and interrupt the process, interrupt the school to prison pipeline, take these kids, and for about $6,000 a year, they have a success rate that's over 90%. These kids go on to become nurses and business people and whatever they decide to become. And they don't end up in the criminal legal system. And it's important to note that according to New York City Comptroller, it costs $565,000 a year to keep somebody in Rikers Island. So for 1/100th of that price of putting a kid in a place where they're going to be brutalized, quite possibly killed, and have a future that is very dark, Angel is turning these lives around or allowing them to be who they were always meant to be in the first place. So I'm really, really deeply touched that I was, given this opportunity to introduce Angel, and now I want to turn it over to Kalia. Thank you.
So I'll be brief, but straight to the heart, where Angel has touched me so very, very deeply. He's a man who truly does live up to his name in every sense of the word. I seem to have these first experiences with folks somewhere within the system. So Angel and I were in court together. And we sat there, and for the first time, I watched a prosecutor squeeze the life out of a child. To this day, it makes me so emotional. And I, found that moment so profound and moving, but what I found even more so moving was my tears were times nothing compared to in his eyes. This is something that he witnesses every day, and still, with an open heart and fresh tears, we both kind of looked at each other and felt the same feeling. And from that point forward, I just honestly, again, knew that Angel truly was an angel. The time that I've spent with the program, Avenues for Justice, has been humbling. My work here as a board member at the Juvenile Law Center has taught me all of the essential ingredients of what's needed to make a program successful. And by all means, Avenues for Justice embodies that special recipe, and so very, very much more. To see everything from the culinary arts programs to the love, the warmth, the kindness, the dignity that's restored into these children's hearts and minds and glistens through their eyes has been nothing short of remarkable and a miracle. As Jason has pointed out, they do this on a shoestring budget. They stand as an example to all of us as to what is truly possible, not just when we love, but when we care and truly think and fight hard, something I know a little bit about for what we're doing. So Angel, it's with absolute humility and gratitude that we give you this tonight. Me as a board member here, me as someone who's inspired by you and has been humbled by being a recipient of your award, and as a mother, I see my child who's here tonight. I'm so blessed, to have a healthy, strong baby boy, and I feel that way as an extension of motherhood every time I look at the children that you serve. So bless you, we welcome you, and we congratulate you. Thank you.
Love your work. Thank you so much. Oh, it's a beautiful piece. Good evening. I want to thank everyone for the Juvenile Law Center for the incredible honor. My deepest appreciation goes to the selection committee and the team and the commitment to the importance of this work. I want to acknowledge my fellow awardees, Mr. Bryan Stevenson, Elizabeth Scott, and Laurence Steinberg. I truly am out of my domain here because I run this small little program in New York City that started out on the Lower East Side with no money at all. Always in the red, put a small board of directors together, and my predecessor, Robert Siegel, who was an NYU student who actually came east, and this is and I'm going to date myself, this is 1974, when New York was a different world. It was dark, it was poor. It was in terrible condition. Our community, I grew up in the Lower East Side, and the Lower East Side was burned down completely to a point that they were selling buildings for $1 for anybody who wanted them, and nobody bought them. Mistake, I should have bought a dozen of them. So out of sort of that kind of scenario is where Avenue for Justice, the Andrew Glover Youth Program, was branded to Avenue for Justice, was born out of the necessity to make sure that young people on the Lower East Side had a fighting chance to better their lives. 45 years ago, probably 50 for me, as a result of a young person finding themselves having multiple encounters with the law enforcement, and yield life-changing results. Court appearances, sentencing, and followed by a bad childhood wasn't working. So we stepped up. Robert Siegel and I went to court one day with a kid who said, "Can you guys go to court? I'm scared." He lived with his mom, who wasn't able to come with him. And we stood in front of the rail of this court out of Raymond's in our sneakers and T-shirts, and the judge is like, "Who are these two guys standing on my well?" And the kid says, "My mentor and my counselor," and asked us to come up. And from there grew this concept of a program that could intervene with the system, a program at a community base that at that time we had some of the toughest judges in our system. And many of those judges welcomed us into a system that I believe I was probably one of the first alternative to incarceration programs privately that appeared in the system. And judges kind of bid to that because they saw me every day. They saw me in front of these judges with reports about these kids, good or bad. That gave us integrity, and more judges called for us. The DS office kind of has gone along with us, which hasn't been easy, and it's never easy. It's been 50 years, and we're still struggling with trying to convince prosecutors that jail doesn't work. And we believe in service opposed to jails. And we believe that young people should have the opportunities to make up for some of the mistakes that they make. And of course, I was involved with creating a youth party in Manhattan when a young man put his hand in his pocket. It was a political year and said he had a gun, "Give me your money." And of course, New York responded to that politically, and the juvenile law raised out of that. That juvenile law exists today, tweaked in every state. It's different, and as you said, some horrible things have happened that have come from that piece. In New York, we went, Judge Michael Corriere, who I'm sure many people here know, was an amazing judge, who's retired today, who actually lobbied, I lobbied with him and other people before bars associations and court administrations to, again, communicate the message that we're dealing with kids, and you can't send a kid in front of some of these Supreme Court judges who were dealing with murderers and putting away killers. So the part grew. After a number of meetings and with bar associations and court administration, they finally decided that they would that they would have a youth part. And that was the beginning, and it's been a great thing because what happened ultimately is that we created one solid part where all these young people, 14 and 15-year-olds, would come in. And the judge and the prosecutors would work very differently with these kids, and especially with Judge Corriere, who made it possible for a lot of these young people to get opportunities, to get records sealed. You all have children, 14 brothers. We've all been 14. Who are we at 14? And yet we're doing serious damage to these young people. A felony conviction. I have 19-year-olds. I got 18-year-olds. I sometimes have cases where I have a 19-year-old and an 18-year-old. The 18-year-old is the one who actually did whatever was going on, but the other one was acting in concert, as the law would say. Sadly, the 18-year-old can get adjudicated, but the 19-year-old cannot. And so some of my concerns is that today, and looking to obviously to see whether the law should go up to 21 for adjudication, because we want these young people to be employed, we want them to move forward. But how could they with this felony conviction? We're working with some kids, and I have some cohorts employment programs, and young people get a job, and a week later they come into the office, very sad, with a letter from the city or the state saying that they found that you have an open matter, it's not even a conviction yet, and not able to allow to keep the job. And that breaks a kid's heart. That's a way of young people going back into the system. Which is something that obviously there's a lot of people like me working on this, and I'm so pleased to be in a room with amazing individuals who have dedicated their lives to this work. We have a 94% success rate with, again, young offenders. I speak of the youth part, but we're also very much involved with the with the 16, 17, 18, up to 24-year-olds, which is a different struggle in trying to creative. And Avenue for Justice is known to be very creative in plea bargaining in court, in trying to persuade sometimes judges and prosecutors to see what we're putting in front of them and why they should perhaps allow the person to take the plea to the felony, but then consider a repleter after I can show that this kid doesn't need to have that conviction. That's not an easy thing to do, as you guys know. There's a big struggle. I mean, I've been doing this for 50 years, and for 50 years, we're still fighting the same fight, which is sort of annoying, but we've made a lot of progress. And you know, as a small non-for-profit, even though we're not so little anymore, at least kind of you guys found us, which is amazing. I've been a well-kept secret in New York for a really long time. Kalia found me, which I appreciate. And I'm funded by some of the larger foundations in town and some of the smaller foundations in town, from Robin Hood to the Lehman Foundation, and everybody in between. Anyone who funds kids, we knock on their door. And generally, if they open the door, I got an amazing administrative staff that kicks it right in. And traditionally, we've been meeting our budget, which I've been very thrilled about. The success of this program, it's really, while I pushed this program for a number of years by myself and somebody else, I've grown this program to the degree that it stands on its own today. And I have some of the most amazing staff that make all this possible, that appear in court every day, that are checking curfews, that are making sure the kid is going to school, making sure the drug test is happening, making sure that the job that we got them, they're doing, that they're on time, addressing issues at home, which are part of the process. So on that note, I'd like for my staff to stand up, and I'd like to acknowledge them for a moment. So I guess I just want to thank you guys. This is an amazing honor. I wrote a large speech and I wrote a little one. I went with the small one, ultimately, but I just, was in the making for a little while, and it's amazing how this day came so quickly. And again, a lot of us are so busy that we're not looking at calendars other for the things that we need to do on a day-to-day. So I, again, remain thankful. An amazing panel, and I hope that I wish you guys success in the future, and thank you so much for this honor. Appreciate it.
Please welcome to the stage Marcia Levick and Bob Schwartz.
Hi, Bob.
Marcia, good to see you again.
Actually, this is disappointing.
Yeah, they promised us a teleprompter. But
Well, I have the envelope here, so we'll still be able to figure out who it is that we're announcing. Barbie?
no, I don't think she won the leadership prize either.
Do you have the other envelope?
I do, actually.
Okay.
This is weeks of rehearsal.
So obvious.
Oh, even without my glasses. It's Larry Steinberg and Buffy Scott are the recipients. About whom we'll say a few things.
A few things.
So it's a little bit unusual for researchers and academics to get leadership prizes, I would think. They are great leaders, however, when they not only change the way the world thinks about their subject matter, but when that change of thinking leads to changes in the world itself. Larry Steinberg and Buffy Scott changed the narrative around adolescence and crime. 30 years ago, there was talk of super predators. Politicians demonized and dehumanized the children who the justice system was designed to serve, and that is not the case today. Together, Larry and Buffy contributed to a paradigm shift. The world sees kids differently today, in large part because of their work. This was true in the United States Supreme Court, in state courts around the country, in state legislatures, and in the way we lawyers for children do our work. We owe Larry and Buffy a great deal. I'm going to talk a bit about Larry, probably to his chagrin, and then Marsha will speak a few words about Buffy. It was an inspired choice when Lori Garducki from MacArthur tapped Larry to lead the Foundation's research network on adolescent development and juvenile justice. That was almost 30 years ago. Larry assembled some of the greatest researchers in the country. He patiently built a record that changed the way practitioners and policymakers think about competence to stand trial, about blameworthiness, what level of guilt should we ascribe to teenagers, and kids' capacity for change, which is represented, I think, not only by you, Joe, but by all of us here in terms of our change since our teenage years. I had the good fortune to watch Larry in action, to see how he, as an educator, taught reporters, legislators, youth justice administrators, and so many more. He's been an expert witness in scores of cases involving youth tried as adults. He's authored the leading text on adolescent development and written briefs for his professional associations that have influenced the United States Supreme Court. The cumulative effect of Larry's work has been remarkable, and it is indeed an honor to us that we can honor that work tonight.
So before I get to you, Buffy, I do want to take a moment to just kind of acknowledge the extraordinary threads that bind our winners tonight. This is the dream team. The work of Larry and Buffy and Bryan and Angel. Every one of you needed the other to accomplish the extraordinary things that you have accomplished. So we honor you, we thank you, we praise you. So Buffy, so I've had the pleasure of working with Buffy for several years, but I think what's really remarkable that I want to speak to, Bob spoke a lot about the academic research, the ways in which the academy that both of you come from really kind of completely changed the jurisprudence in this country about how we think about children under the Constitution. But that work began one of the very first articles that you guys published, which made the research that you were doing so accessible, was Not Guilty by Reason of Adolescence. And that article is cited multiple times in Roper versus Simmons, the very first case decided by the Supreme Court in 2005, striking the juvenile death penalty. And it was the beginning of a crescendo of US Supreme Court cases that repeatedly built upon, to the point in JDB actually decided in 2012 when the Supreme Court justices said, research, what research? We all know this stuff. You created a field that literally we all kind of talk about like we're sort of little mini neuroscientists. And it's not easy to do that. So, kudos to you guys for doing that. I also want to note that the Buffy not only has kind of had this extraordinary contribution with Larry in terms of really changing the jurisprudence before the Supreme Court, what I also really respected about you, after those cases came down, was that you stayed with us. You kind of stayed with the advocacy community. You continued to write, you continued to speak, to really educate and train the lawyers who were suddenly trying to process all of the extraordinary gains and successes that you guys had won for us. So I want to make sure that I acknowledge that. After you had accomplished all of that, you kept going. And Buffy's most recent successes, of course, was heading the ALI's restatement of the law of children in the law, which is no small thing. I had a little bit of some engagement with that, but like everything else that Buffy has done, she did it with great aplomb and success and effectiveness. I want to note, we heard a little bit from Rhea in the opening remarks about some numbers about what we've done in Pennsylvania. Thank you, Abdullah and his organization, Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth, which issued a report yesterday, so timely, which honestly puts your success in very, very stark numbers. 10 years ago, there were 2,900 individuals serving life without parole who had received that sentence when they were under the age of 18. Today, there are just about 440 individuals still serving that sentence. Amazing. About 330 of those 400 or so are awaiting resentencing. Let's bring them home. And in the last 5 years, only 65 individuals have received a new sentence of life without parole. So that is a wow. So my closing comment is this. Some of you may be fans of the other Buffy. She spells her name with a Y. Our Buffy spells her name with an IE, but she is every bit a vampire slayer. Please come on. Larry and Buffy.
Wow. So I am just incredibly grateful to receive this award from the Juvenile Law Center, which is an organization that for almost 50 years, as we heard, has done so much to promote the well-being of youth. And I'm incredibly honored to receive the Leadership Prize with my wonderful co-author and colleague, Larry Steinberg. And finally, it means a lot to me that Bob and Marcia presented the award to us. They have been friends for a very long time, and they are both just extraordinary leaders in the youth justice field, as you all know. So it's very gratifying that the work of the MacArthur Foundation, the research networks, and other developmental researchers has had an impact in reforming youth justice law and policy, so that today courts and other lawmakers are far more likely than in the 1990s to accept that children are different and should be treated differently in the justice system. But the contributions of researchers and law professors would have had little impact without the hard work of lawyer advocates, who have taken the research and persuaded courts that youth in the system should be treated differently from adults. So together with Bryan Stevenson, the Juvenile Law Center lawyers led by Marcia played such a critical role in the juvenile sentencing cases in the Supreme Court. But their work did not stop there. Advocates have deployed the Supreme Court's developmental framework on a wide range of issues, from the need to protect the confidentiality of juvenile records to the sentencing of emerging adults. And so the constitutional opinions became a catalyst for much broader justice system reforms, and the Juvenile Law Center has been at the forefront of these efforts. Of course, everyone in this room knows that there is much work to be done. As Chris Henning, a past Leadership Prize recipient, has shown, Black and brown youth are less likely to benefit from the developmental approach to youth crime than other teenagers. Indeed, their normal adolescent behavior is often viewed not as mitigating, but as evidence of increased culpability and threat. So the Juvenile Law Center and Professor Henning and other advocates have been targeting racial bias in the justice system, and my hope is that through their efforts, the time will come when the developmental approach will benefit all youth. So thank you so much. Thank you for this award.
Well, Buffy said much of what I was going to say, but I changed my mind because of an experience I had this morning that I'll tell you about. But it is an honor and a privilege to share this award with my good friend Buffy, with whom I've been working for nearly 30 years now, and to be among the group of recipients of this year's prize. It's really an incredible honor. The Juvenile Law Center played a very important role in influencing my career in ways that they might not know. The first time I was ever asked to really think about the application of developmental science to juvenile justice policy and practice was at a symposium that was organized in 1995 by Bob Schwartz at Temple Law School. And Bob invited me. We disagree about whether that was the first time we met or not, but we're too old to know things like that. But that kicked off the next 30 years of the work that I did with Buffy and our colleagues on the network. So I'm not only grateful for the prize, I'm grateful for the career that JLC stimulated. I also want to say that I've been very fortunate to have Buffy and Marcia and Bob as mentors who taught me a lot about the law. Since when I first got into this, I knew nothing about the law at all. And I was always able to turn to all of them for advice on how to frame something so that it would be useful to people in court. So I was in court this morning by Zoom in a courtroom in Kentucky, testifying at a hearing for a 17-year-old. I'll tell you about that in a moment, but the reason I'm telling you this is that this was not a case involving the death penalty or life without parole. It was kind of a run-of-the-mill juvenile case. This 17-year-old kid was playing on an Xbox with his friend and the friend's girlfriend. We're all together in an apartment. And the kid, our client, had found a handgun. I don't know where he found it. But he was holding it while they were playing on the Xbox, and without even thinking about it, he accidentally pulled the trigger of the gun. The bullet went through the floor, didn't hit anybody, and lodged itself in a mattress in the apartment that was beneath this one. The prosecutor there, the kid was ultimately found by the police in a kind of a strange series of coincidences, and arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree wanton disregard of life, fleeing the scene. He had also taken the gun and thrown it behind a shed when he knew the police were looking for him. So hiding evidence and criminal mischief. And it was just like a dumb thing that teenagers do. And I see so many cases like this. So the work that came out of the network and the JLC is not just about the death penalty and life without parole. It's about the average cases, of which there are many, many more. And I don't know why the prosecutor there wanted to try this kid as an adult, but he did. And I testified this morning citing Buffy's scholarship and the work of our network. I got an email this afternoon before we were headed over here, saying that the judge decided to keep him in juvenile court. So this is important. I asked the defense attorney, what was he looking at if he went to criminal court? And she said the possibility of 20 years of incarceration for what he did. She said if they stacked the sentences consecutively, he'd be there for 20 years. And I said, well, since he's in juvenile court, what's he going to face there? And she said, he's going to have a mental health evaluation, and they're going to figure out whether he needs counseling. And if he follows the recommendations about counseling, that's that. So you think about the different trajectories of life that this young man would have faced had he been tried as an adult. And so the JLC's work is terrific, but it's very broad in what it has influenced, not just these major significant cases, but the whole way in which juveniles just en masse are treated in the justice system. So I'm very grateful for the prize, but grateful for the career and for my long affiliation with the Juvenile Law Center. So thank you all very much.
Please welcome to the stage Abdallah Latif.
Greetings, greetings, greetings. Revolutionary greetings to all of you. Greetings of love. Greetings of joy, hopefulness, and resistance. It's a pleasure and an honor to see and share this space with all of you this evening. Usually those who know me know that there is rarely a mic that I don't like. But not this night. This night, trying to honor someone who, in my mind, is my friend, my mentor, my hero, my big brother. There's never enough time to say what needs to be said. Not just as a formerly condemned child, sentenced to death by incarceration, only otherwise known as life without possibility of parole, but also as an individual who learned immensely what it means to have love, to have and display hopefulness, to have mercy, with justice tempered with mercy. We all know who we speak about when we talk about those attributes. And on this evening, there's two things that come to mind that I hope you will indulge me in. One is a historic story, historical event, and one is a story that I think we're familiar with. The historical event is Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who gave us such wisdom in his advocacy, in his fight for civil rights, and for a better recognition of our shared humanity. And it was at a time when he was under attack. He was under attack because he had transcended beyond public accommodation and civil rights. He expanded into this area of recognizing the need for human rights, for human dignity, for access not just to public accommodation, but access to housing, to livable wages, to divesting in the military industrial complex, and specifically his thoughts around the Vietnam War. And as a result of his positions, he was under attack. And his refrain was, "For those who want me to shut up, I cannot. For those who want me to shut up, I cannot." There are times in our existence in which we must stand up, in which we must speak out. He said that cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expedience asks the question, is it politic? Is it politically correct? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? Is it the right thing to do? So when faced in those circumstances where we must stand up, even when it is unsafe, even when it is not politically correct, even when it is not popular, but we stand up simply because it is the right thing to do. Bryan Stevenson, our unsung hero, our leader in this space of leaderful movement development, has been uncompromised in his courage, his tenacity, his moral fortitude, and his constancy, standing when others choose to sit, speaking when others choose to shut up, challenging us to be better human beings, rooted and steeped in ideas of mercy, compassion, and the right to redemption. This second story that I would like to share with you is one that I think that some of us are familiar with. And it was like Bryan, just like Martin Luther King, who was undergoing tumultuous circumstances because of the stances that he took. In Just Mercy, Bryan recalls a story. Soon after he was pulled over and accosted, harassed, demeaned. And soon after that experience, he spoke in a church. And as brilliantly as he always does, with full articulation, he explained the fallacy of the death penalty, the injustices that animated the disparate sentencing. He talked about all of those injustices that animated our justice system, but also spoke to our humanity and our role and our place. And as he was given his brilliant eulogy, as it were, destroying injustice with the sword of truth, he noticed in the audience an elder gentleman who looked at him stern and mean-faced almost. He speaks about almost being intimidated by the sight. Certainly a bit unease. And as he concluded his speech, and all of the celebratory acknowledgments and people began to dissipate, the elder gentleman with his aide was wheeled up to the forefront. And he says with this stern, uncompromising face, "Do you know what you're doing? Do you know what you're doing?" Bryan said he was taken aback, a bit shocked, not quite sure how to respond. And he says the third time, "Do you know what you're doing?" "I'll tell you what you're doing, young man. You're beating the drums for justice." Bryan Stevenson is the drum major of our era. It is with tremendous honor, pride, and appreciation that I welcome Bryan to the stage to accept this leadership award as a beacon of light for our humanity. I need to do this.
Well, this has already been an amazing night. Thank you for that extraordinary, incredibly beautiful, memorable introduction, my friend. I love you dearly. And when I got here, I had the great privilege of meeting several of the people I call my friends, my brothers, my community, people who were condemned to die in prison in this state. And we got to embrace, and every time I meet these extraordinary people, it just makes all the difference in the world. And I don't want to say anything until I invite all of them to please stand so I can thank you for being here tonight. So I actually worked at the Juvenile Law Center as an intern 42 years ago. And it was a time in my life when I was really struggling. I hadn't quite figured out what I was going to do. I had started at Harvard Law School just the year before. This was after my first year in law school that I came to Juvenile Law Center. And I was a philosophy major in college, and I hadn't really thought about what came after college. I was a first-generation college student. And during my senior year, one day somebody came up to me and said, "Now, you know, Bryan, nobody's going to pay you to philosophize when you graduate from college." And I sort of panicked because I hadn't really thought about what comes after college. So I frantically started looking into graduate programs in history and English and political science, and to my horror discovered that to get admitted to graduate school in history, English, and political science, you have to know something about history, English, and political science. I was very intimidated by that. And I kept looking, and to be honest, that's really how I found my way to law school. It became very clear to me, you don't need to know anything to go to law school. You really don't. And so I signed up for that, and a few months later found myself at Harvard Law School, except on the first day, they were trying to make us comfortable. So they put us in small orientation groups, and I went out with my group of about 10 other law students, and the orientation group leader just asked everybody, "Why are you in law school?" And I was sitting there, and all of the other students, all of the other kids in the group started talking about how they were in law school. And they all started talking about how they were the son or the daughter or the grandson or the granddaughter or the nephew or the niece of a lawyer. And as they kept talking about these familiar relations, I started to panic because I realized I wasn't related to a lawyer. And they all kept talking about the lawyers and their families as part of the reason why they came to be lawyers. And the more they kept talking, the more diminished I felt. And then I realized something I'd never even thought about until that moment. I realized that not only was I not related to a lawyer, I realized for the first time that I'd never met a lawyer. And by the time they got to me, I just felt so diminished. I felt so unqualified that I didn't answer the question. I told a joke, I distracted people, I wasn't really honest. And afterward, I felt terribly. And I called my mom and said, Mom, I don't think I belong in law school. And my mother was this amazing person. She said, what are you talking about? You belong wherever you go. You're the smartest person in the world. You can do anything you want to do. And then she said, now you need to go find all of those kids and tell them why you're really in law school. And I hung up and I felt better. I knew I wasn't going to find those kids and tell them why. But a couple of weeks later, I actually did find all of the people in that group. And what I told them was, I wasn't honest on the first day. I'm not related to a lawyer, never met a lawyer, but I'm in law school because my great-grandfather was enslaved in Caroline County, Virginia. And he had a hope of freedom so powerful that he risked his life to learn to read. There were anti-literacy laws that made it illegal for enslaved people to learn to read, but he risked his life because he had a hope for freedom, and he wanted to be ready for freedom by learning to read. And this was in the 1850s. He couldn't have known that a civil war would be coming in a decade and there would be emancipation, but he learned to read as a teenager in Virginia. And when emancipation came, my great-grandfather was able to help other people because he knew how to read. My grandmother talked about how once a week he would read the newspaper from the start to the finish so other formerly enslaved people in the community who didn't know how to read would know what was going on. And he would stand on the porch and read the newspaper. And my grandmother loved the power he had just because he could read the paper. And she said she would push her siblings aside when he started reading, and she would sit next to him and she'd wrap her arms around his leg. And she wanted to do that because she was persuaded that you learn to read by touching somebody while they read. And he figured out what she was doing, and he said, no, Victoria, I'm going to teach you how to read. And he taught my grandmother to read. And my grandmother worked as a domestic her whole life. She cleaned other people's homes until she was in her 90s. But my grandmother was a reader. She had 10 children. My mom was the youngest of her 10 kids, and she insisted that all of her children be readers. And then she insisted that her grandchildren be readers. And I'd go visit my grandmother, and sometimes she would stand on the porch when we pulled up, and she'd stand out there with a stack of books, and you were going to have to read something before she let you into the house. And she was very tactical and strategic. My grandmother would say, Bryan, what do you want for dessert? And I'd come up with something crazy, and she'd go make something that smelled so good, and I'd go run into the kitchen, and there she'd be with these stack of books. And I'd have to read something to get in there to get the dessert. And she created this consciousness about the power of words, the power of learning and education. I grew up in a poor, racially segregated community. I started my education in a colored school because I didn't let black children attend the public schools when I was a little boy. Lawyers came into our community and opened things up, but when you looked outside our door, you didn't see a lot of opportunity. Most of the adults in my community didn't have high school degrees, not because they weren't smart or hardworking, but there were literally no high schools for black people in our county. And so they worked at the poultry plants, they did domestic work. You didn't see much hope outside the door, but as a child, my mom went into debt. And she did something extraordinary. My mom went into debt and she bought us the World Book Encyclopedia. And we had those books in our house. And you couldn't see much hope outside the door, but you could see it in those books. And I'd never met a lawyer. I'd never talked to a lawyer, but I'd read about lawyers in those books. And I didn't understand it as a 10-year-old, because Christmas comes along and you go outside and your friends are like, well, I got a basketball for Christmas. I got a bicycle. I got a baseball. And I'd have to say, well, I got volume G of the World Book Encyclopedia. But when I got to Harvard Law School, I realized why I'm in law school. I realized I was in law school because I had been given this legacy of hope from enslaved people who believed that freedom would come, from people who were facing terrorism and violence who believed that they could find a way to create love in the midst of sorrow. Through the humiliation of segregation, I was surrounded by people who bore that degradation, who bore that humiliation, and still found a way to love. And all of a sudden, I didn't feel diminished when I was at law school. I actually felt empowered. I didn't think anybody had advantages over me. In fact, I felt like I had something precious and powerful and resourceful, and it made me believe that I could do this law thing. And I went to Philadelphia after my first year of law school, and I thought I had met lawyers, but really I discovered that the law faculty at Harvard Law School, they weren't really lawyers. The first lawyers I met were Bob Schwartz and Marcia Levick. And what they showed me is that lawyers can be people who are smart and hardworking and tactical and strategic and dedicated. But more than that, they showed me that lawyers can be kind. Lawyers can be compassionate. Lawyers can make a difference in the lives of the people around them. And Bob and Marcia, I want to thank you for modeling a kind of lawyering for me that meant something to me when I left that office. I went to death row a few months after I left Philadelphia and found a calling to stand with the condemned, to stand with those who've been marginalized, to stand with those who've been excluded, to stand with those who've been disfavored. And over the last 40-some years, we've been trying to do this work of changing narratives. And that's the key thing that I believe we're all here tonight. It is such a thrill to be getting an award with Larry and Buffy and Angel, the incredible work that you're doing. It's just so moving to me. But we have work to do. We have got to change these narratives. There's something growing in our environment right now. The politics of fear and anger are reemerging. And we have more and more people who are now repeating the rhetoric that we heard 40 and 50 years ago. And if we're not careful, they're going to start talking about super predators again. If we're not careful, they're going to start talking about putting people away, locking them up, and throwing away the keys. We still have 13 states in this country where there is no minimum age for trying a child as an adult. I'm still representing 8- and 9-year-old children who face 50- and 60-year prison sentences in adult prisons. And we've got work to do. We've got to change this narrative that has been bred by the politics of fear and anger. And you just wait. It'll happen in Philadelphia. It'll happen in New York. It'll happen all over this country. There will be these voices that try to govern through fear and anger. And when people allow themselves to be governed by fear and anger, they start tolerating things they should never tolerate. They start accepting things they should never accept. That's how all of these beautiful young people were condemned in Pennsylvania. That's how we threw away so many lives. I'm so honored when I meet these extraordinary people who have survived the prisons here, but it breaks my heart when they say 43 years, 45 years, 47 years. We did something tragic, and we have to change the narratives that continue to condemn. I believe that all children are children. We do not show our commitment in this country to helping children by looking at how well we treat talented kids, gifted kids, privileged kids. Our commitment to children has to be expressed by how we treat abused kids, neglected kids, the kids that Larry was talking about in Kentucky. Those are the children that reflect our commitment, and that's why the work of Juvenile Law Center is so vital. We have so much work to do. We've got work to do about race because we're still burdened by our history of racial injustice. The narratives of racial difference are still around us. This ideology, many of the people in this room who were condemned to die in prison would not have been condemned, as Jason pointed out, but for a presumption of dangerousness and guilt that got assigned to them because of their race, because of their color. And we've got so much work to do to confront this history. So I come tonight grateful, honored, really thrilled to be in this space with so many extraordinary people. But I also come to say that we have to continue the work. We have to continue the fight. I've told this before. Many years ago, I was working on a case involving a 14-year-old who was being prosecuted as an adult. And I'd been traveling all around, and I hadn't slept very much, and I wasn't really thinking straight. And when I got home, I just started thinking about how does a judge have the power to turn a 14-year-old into an adult? And I kept thinking about it. How does the judge do that? He must have magic. She must have the ability to do things that other people can't do. And all of a sudden, I got in my mind, well, if the judge has that kind of magic, that kind of power, you should ask the judge to give your client the identity that you think your client should have. And I started thinking about it, and I said, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And I worked on this motion, and I styled the motion to try my 14-year-old poor black male client like a 75-year-old privileged white corporate executive. And I put in my motion why I wanted him to have that identity rather than the identity that he had. And I started talking about all the misconduct in that community. And I talked about judicial misconduct, police misconduct, and prosecutorial misconduct. There was a line in my motion saying, there is no conduct in this county, it's all misconduct. And the next morning I woke up and I thought, wow, that was a crazy dream I had about that crazy motion. And then I looked in my file and I realized it wasn't a dream. I'd actually written the motion, and worse than that, I'd mailed it to the court. A few months later, it was time to go to court, and I drove down to this courthouse, and I thought, oh my God, this is the case where I filed that insane motion. It's going to be all kinds of craziness. And I parked my car, and I got out of the car, and I was walking up the steps to the courthouse, and there was an older black man there. He was a janitor. And when he saw me, he came over to me, and he said, who are you? I said, I'm a lawyer. He said, you're a lawyer? I said, yes, sir, I am. He said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm going to be arguing a motion. He said, you are? He said, who are you representing? And I told him who I was representing. And then this man hugged me, just hugged me. And he whispered in my ear, he said, I want you to know I'm so proud of you, so proud of you. And it just energized me. And I went into the courtroom, and I went into the courtroom where the judge was. And as soon as I walked through the door, the judge started hollering. He said, Mr. Stevenson, did you file this crazy motion that I have? And at that point, I'd been energized by this older man. So I said, yes, I filed that motion. And we started going at it, and the prosecutor was hollering, and the judge was hollering. I was kind of hollering back. And people were filing into the courtroom outraged that I was talking about racial bias and misconduct. And before I knew it, the courtroom was packed full of people, angry about these arguments I was making. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw that older black man, the janitor. He kept pacing back and forth in front of the door, and the door had a window, and he kept pacing, he kept looking through. And finally, after a bit, that older man opened the door, he walked into the courtroom, and he sat down behind me. About a few minutes later, the judge said, we're going to take a break, take a recess. And the judge declared the recess, but a deputy sheriff jumped up, and he ran across the courtroom, and he went over to this older black man, the janitor. And he was upset that he'd come into court. He said, Jimmy, what are you doing in this courtroom? And that's when this older man stood up and he looked at me and he looked at that sheriff. He said, I came into this courtroom to tell this young man, you keep your eyes on the prize and hold on. I've come here really more than anything to say to my friends at Juvenile Law Center, to say to all of my co-recipients, to say to all of you, we've got work to do. We've got to lift up. We've got to protect our children, and we cannot be dissuaded. We cannot be turned around by the politics of this moment that wants to preach and advance fear and anger. More than anything, I hope you will stand with the Juvenile Law Center, and you will help them and the rest of us keep our eyes on the prize and hold on. Thank you all very, very much.
It was not in my job description to follow Bryan Stevenson on the podium. But I just want to thank again and congratulate all of our recipients, those who introduced them, all of you here, and all of us who will get up tomorrow morning, if not later tonight, to continue the fight. Please continue to support, to energize, to fight with the staff at Juvenile Law Center. Thanks to all of you. Enjoy the reception. Stay, mingle, have a wonderful evening, and thanks to all of you.